Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the fact that finally, Marvel has answered the question of how we as fans can know what Marvel considers to be sacred timeline canon. Now, granted, everything is canon to the multiverse, right? I mean, that's kind of the pat answer. Everything's out there somewhere. Okay, that's nice. Thank you. We want to know about sacred timeline canon, though. That's what we want. Well, Brad Winterbaum, the man, the myth, the legend, did a new interview. Love that guy. And he gave us the answer, the definitive answer. So I think you're going to find this really interesting. Let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a March contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You might win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. Also, we have a membership option if you want to help me with my goal of doing this full time one day. You get lots of perks like custom emojis, behind the scenes videos, etc. But no matter how you support the channel, it's all greatly appreciated. Leaving comments, liking videos, subscribing, it all goes a long way. So thank you so much. Okay, so the question at hand is, which of the pre-Disney Plus shows are considered canon to the sacred timeline? I mean, there are 37 seasons, 468 episodes, running from 2013 to 2021, with another season of Hitmonkey actually coming out this year. So yeah, I'm going to have to update this before long. So which of these are considered sacred timeline canon? Well, let's be honest. I don't think anybody ever considered either MODOK or Hitmonkey to be sacred timeline canon. They're good shows. That's not the issue. Check them out. But we know they're not sacred timeline. All right, we get that. And obviously Gifted and Legion, I mean, they're part of the X-verse, not even part of the main MCU. Now, I did do a video on whether I think they're part of the sacred timeline for the X-Men universe. That's really interesting if you want to check that one out. But we know they're not part of the main MCU. But what about the rest of the pre-Disney Plus shows? Well, I have always taken the attitude they're canon until Marvel tells us different. So I've treated them all as though they're canon, and I did timeline videos, as you can see, on the Defenders, well before they was ever recently declared, as you know, to be sacred timeline canon. So well before that, I did Defenders, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Hulu Freeform, the Spider-Man movies, there's the one on the Legion and the Gifted, newscasts, I did one on the video games for the Spider-Man games, Scott Lang's book, and then down in the lower right-hand corner, you can see I did a video, which if you've never seen it, check it out, it's really cool. All the ties between the shows and the main MCU, as well as the ties between the shows themselves. So I have always treated them all as though they're canon. In fact, I even put them in the Google Timeline doc. If you've never checked this thing out, it's out on my Google Drive. I'll leave a pinned comment so you can go find it. But if you notice in the type column, you can filter, and there's everything out there. The Fox movies, Netflix shows, ABC shows, Hulu shows, so Cloak and Dagger, etc. It's all out there. I have always treated them the same. But how does Marvel treat them? That's what we wanted to know. So along comes the timeline book, right? We're going to get our definitive answer now. It's going to be solved, right? Kinda. I mean, first of all, it started off by saying there's only 30 films, 8 series, and 4 phases in here. So that meant none, like 0 of the pre-Disney Plus shows were included. Okay, that's not good, right? And then they said the timeline presented in the book is specific to the sacred timeline through phase 4, and even said for now, this is the history of the MCU unraveled from end to end. So that didn't look good for those shows, right? But then they waffled, and Miss Minute says, well, it isn't everything that happens in 616, much less the multiverse. Okay, that's not helpful, right? I mean, they're not in the book. That's not a good sign, but what is this supposed to mean, right? Plus, a lot of people ask questions like, wait, how is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. not considered sacred timeline, right? Every character you see here is in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and also in the main MCU. That is a lot of crossover, right? Plus, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. crossed over with multiple movies. Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, The Winter Soldier, Age of Ultron, huge crossover with the Helicarrier, also Civil War and Infinity War. Come on, surely this has got to be sacred timeline canon. Well, the timeline book does show the Helicarrier in Age of Ultron, but it pretty much just says Nick Fury and Maria Hill pilot a former S.H.I.E.L.D. Helicarrier. They don't reference Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at all. That was frustrating, right? Then Agent Carter. Agent Carter's not in the timeline book. I mean, look at this. Upper left is the Agent Carter TV show, and there's Jarvis. And then in the bottom, there's Jarvis with Howard Stark in Endgame. Surely that means the Agent Carter TV show is canon, right? Well, to the timeline book's credit, they do actually show this picture. There's Jarvis, but they don't mention he's Jarvis. So, I don't know. I mean, they didn't put it in the timeline book, right? So we were really left scratching our heads. And not to mention Daredevil showing up and Kingpin showing up in present day, but then they didn't have the Defender shows either. Well, the man, the myth, the legend, Brad Winterbaum, I love this dude, goes on an interview talking about Echo, but as part of it, mentions the Defender shows are Sacred Timeline canon. Yes. And in fact, they show right away on the Disney Plus timeline. That was incredible. So the dude's magic. He snaps his fingers, and there they are. Awesome. Okay, so it's also interesting to note, though, that they do still appear in their own section. Now, we'll talk about more of what that means in a moment, but there's no doubt that they're Sacred Timeline canon. That's not the issue. But you're going to see how Marvel is handling these separate sections in a minute. It's kind of interesting. But okay, so what did that mean? Well, that meant that I immediately went out and added the Netflix shows to my timeline because it's clearly Sacred Timeline canon, right? And here's the rest of them, and there they are fitting in so beautifully. So now we were all waiting to see, will they include more? Well, they did give us some good information here because they said, okay, you know what? We're even going to show you where every season fits in the timeline of the Netflix shows, I Am Groot, Loki, etc. That was awesome. And I will mention, because this comes up all the time, No Way Home is not in this timeline because it's not on every Disney Plus region. It's a bummer, but it will show up between Eternals and Multiverse of Madness at some point. But okay, so we were all waiting. Hey, does this mean maybe more shows are going to get pulled in right away? Because, I mean, Defender shows, those were not in the timeline book, and now suddenly here they are in the Sacred Timeline. So what does this mean? Well, we got some kind of bad news, even though we got clarity. I mean, clarity is good, but the news isn't necessarily good for now. So let's look at this interview. Hollywood Reporter just the other day. Brad Winterbaum, the man, gets on to talk about X-Men 97, and I love this, Daredevil Born Again and how it updated MCU canon. Wow, you know this is going to be good, right? Because that is quite a headline. So this reporter asks him a very pointed question. Marvel Studios recently proclaimed the former Netflix shows to be MCU canon. They're even reflected as such on Disney Plus. Now, I've seen some people try to say that Marvel changed their mind on this subject, but the way I see it is you finally made up your mind. Would you also say that you kept your options open for as long as possible? What a question. And I'll give Winterbaum credit. No waffling, he answered it. So he says, we finally said it out loud. When the Netflix shows were coming out and being made, we were building towards Infinity War and Endgame. We were trying to balance all these film franchises and get them to culminate on screen in these two epic movies. To say it was a challenge is not even correct. It was one of the most challenging creative endeavors the studio ever undertook. I'm not sure there will ever be anything like it again in cinema. And I agree. He said it took so much to get all that stuff to galvanize in one place and in one time so that people could have that experience in the movie theater. He goes on to say, so at the time, to say, all right, we're also going to take this television show and wrap our heads around that, it would have been too much, even though we were communicating back and forth. Everyone on the television side and the film side knew what each other was doing, and you can see that there's a continuity there. The references do line up, but it was just too much for us to wrap our heads around at the time. Okay, that's a really good explanation, and that also explains why the Defenders shows in particular weren't in the timeline book. They hadn't yet made this decision to go back and revisit them and fit them all in. Then here's the big answer. He says, flash forward now to Disney Plus, where we're actually laying out the timeline with tiles on a screen. All of a sudden, we're like, we should do it. Let's just do it. It was also spurred by the redevelopment of Daredevil Born Again. Once again, we started to really lean into some of the mythology and backstory that was established in those Netflix shows. I was asked about this during the press for Echo, and I realized, it's not just assumed. People have an active interest, and they want confirmation. So we were able to do it fairly quickly, and it's interesting that the service of Disney Plus actually became the statement just by rearranging those tiles. And this is key. That's our medium to define the canon now, which is wild to think about. Okay, so that's a big deal. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen Marvel officially say the Disney Plus timeline is the way we define canon. I mean, obviously the timeline book was, but the timeline book only comes out, once every 4 or 5 years if we're lucky? So no, he's saying the Disney Plus timeline is really key. And I have always believed that personally. I've just thought there's no way Kevin Feige wants something so visible to be wrong. Although I've had a lot of people throwing tomatoes at me in the comments. Now, I'm not going to put anybody's name. I'm not going to shame anybody, but people are telling me, dude, the Disney Plus timeline isn't reliable. Disney Plus is looking more and more like an afterthought for Marvel. And somebody else said, I never follow the D Plus timeline order. And then this one I think is really key. They said, I don't think Marvel Studios actually have anything to do with the timeline on Disney Plus, hence why it's all over the place in different territories. Probably some intern who just goes by what they hear in interviews. So I'm not even faulting anybody that had these opinions, okay? I'm just saying for me, I have always assumed no way Feige would let it be wrong. And if it's wrong, he would fix it because this is so visible. So now we know the answer. The Disney Plus timeline is how we know what sacred timeline canon is. So let's look at a couple things here. So we have the complete timeline, notice, and there, sure enough, we see Daredevil, Jessica Jones in there, but we also still see them in their own section. So I think this is important because it tells us something about Marvel and whether they've just made a mistake with the complete timeline or whether they have intentionally left things off of it. Here's what I mean. So we look at Marvel animation. There's lots of Marvel animation out there, but they've only included What If and I Am Groot. Even Moon Girl, I love Moon Girl. If you haven't seen Moon Girl, please watch it. It's so good. But anyway, it's off in the multiverse. It's not part of the sacred timeline. X-Men 97, notice it's not in the sacred timeline. My guess is that we will not, we'll find out tomorrow whether I'm right or wrong on this, but I don't think X-Men 97 is going to show up, the new episodes, in the sacred timeline. It's not part of the sacred timeline. It's part of the multiverse. Look at the one-shots. Notice Agent Carter and All Hail the King, as well as others. Those are in the sacred timeline, the main timeline, but notice Team Thor is not. So just because there's a section doesn't mean everything in it is sacred timeline. And that's where we get really interesting. Let's look at Agents and Inhumans. Notice everything here that you can see is not in the sacred timeline. But if we scroll over, they do have the one-shots in here, and they are in the sacred timeline. So I think this shows it's not just an oversight that it's not in the main timeline. Marvel does not consider them sacred timeline canon. Likewise, my guess is we won't ever see the Spider-Verse movies, the mutant movies, X-Men, and the Fantastic Four movies showing up in the sacred timeline, at least not these legacy movies. Because obviously Tobey and Andrew showed up in No Way Home, yet their movies are not in the sacred timeline. But Tom Holland's are. On the other hand, I'm going to guess that Deadpool and Wolverine will be in the sacred timeline, but the rest of these films will not, because they're considered multiverse, whereas they're going to consider Deadpool and Wolverine part of the sacred timeline, likewise with the new Fantastic Four movie. So I think we have our official answer. As of right now, at least at this moment, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, Inhumans, and Hellstrom are not considered sacred timeline canon. So that means it's up to us as fans. We need to keep lobbying Marvel to bring them into canon. We need to keep trying to tell Marvel, these are important to us. These are really good stuff. Because obviously, we won with Defenders, right? We won. They're all part of sacred timeline canon now. Marvel actually started to do a Daredevil Born Again show that didn't connect and then redid it because they knew how much fans wanted it to connect. So we can influence Marvel. But right now, I think, this is just my opinion, we need to accept they are not sacred timeline canon. None of these. But they can be. So it's bad news, but it's good news. It's bad news because they're not, but it's good news because A, we have an answer. We may not like it, but we have an answer. And B, because we can change it. So I hope you're encouraged by this, but even if it's a little discouraging at the same time. So let me know your opinion. If you think I'm wrong on any of this, that's fine. Tell me. But I think we do have our answer. All right, don't forget we do have that March contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steel book. And we have the membership option if you're interested in that. Also, we do have the Discord. I love to mention this every time. So much going on there. I will leave a pinned comment so you can join if you would like. And then you can be part of these rewatches. You can be part of the Comic Club and MMRPG. You can be part of the DC retrospectives as we're getting ready for the new DCU. We also have an other media forum where you can pretty much talk about anything. We'll create it and you can fire away. And then we all know my thumbnails aren't great. So we're having this fun contest where you can design the thumbnail for my next Moon Girl video, which, by the way, if I haven't mentioned it enough, watch Moon Girl. It's so good. But anyway, I will obviously include the winning thumbnail and give you credit for the beautiful artwork. Again, I will leave a pinned comment so you can join the Discord. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.